We'll call this to let's see. Make sure my microphone's on.
It's on.
Yep.
It's on?
It's on.
You're good.
Can you hear it?
Yeah, sounds good, John.
Okay.
I can't.
Okay, we'll call this workshop to order. Just kind of stand and join us in the pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
The
States.
flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible.
Anthony, remember you?
Yo,
Anthony.
Yes.
Remember you're on,
Delay.
delay.
Okay.
So, you're gonna be coming.
We'll
through.
listen.
10-second delay, so just listen.
Put
Anthony
yourself on
and
mute.
Eric, the roll call, Anthony and Eric are en route. And they'll be here, coming right here. To record show. Yeah, they was here.
Okay, I'm good.
Doing introductory remarks, I want to introduce this workshop. I want to introduce Joe DeLong, who's the Executive Director of the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. And Joe has come at our request because there's a lot of key issues going on in the state. And there's a lot of key concerns that we have and that we've been talking about throughout the budget session. And I guess you can't say enough about what needs to be done this year. It's no different than other years, but it's the same thing, and it's repetitive, and it's trauma, and there's got to be an end in sight. And so with that, Joe will come down and share with us his insights into what's going on. Joe represents the CCM. He represents all 169 Connecticut municipalities. Joe's no stranger to Shelton. He's been the CCM Executive Director now well over 20 years.
Not quite that long, but it feels longer.
Pretty close. And Shelton has been a CCM member for over 30 years. In fact, we go back to Mike Picada's days. That's 32 years. Joe is our voice in Hartford. He's our mouthpiece. He's got to know what's on our mind and what our needs are. And he's agreed to come here and share his insights with us and hear it from us. I asked, maybe I should stop talking now. That's enough of an introduction. Joe's no stranger. Joe, come up to the microphone up here to make sure the mic is on. Yeah, because we're taping this so that it can be seen on the city, on the city website. So
Is this on?
is it on?
Yeah, it
I believe
sounds
so.
like it's
Sounds like it's
Sounds like
on. Okay, great. Well, thank you, first off, for that introduction. It is great to be back in Shelton. And as you said, there are perennial issues. It almost feels like Groundhog Day, because I recall the last time that I was here, we were talking about housing legislation. And some of that same housing legislation that we were talking about, I think this is pre-pandemic, we're now dealing with some of that legislation again this session, in the final weeks of the session. So some of these issues never go away. But let me just begin, before I give too many remarks, of saying that while he's not here, it's always nice to be in the city of my good friend Mayor Loretti. Mayor Loretti, as the CEO representative of the city, does an outstanding job of communicating the needs of Shelton to CCM. And you may be surprised, those of you who know Mark, to learn today that he's not shy. So, there's things on his mind that are important to his constituents. He always brings them to our attention, and I greatly appreciate that. And his work, as I appreciate all of your work, and his advocacy on behalf of the city. One of the things that, when I was invited, that I was asked to talk about, and I'm not gonna talk real long, so I wanna take your questions. I wanna help with them, your challenges with the budget workshop. But one of the things that I was asked to talk about was the fairly robust campaign that we've been running, on education funding. And it's interesting because our organization, and I know you have some of your great, board head and superintendent and other representatives here. Our organization a lot of times has not been as deeply involved as with the education side of municipal budgets, as we have been with all of the other operational sides of municipal budgets. But as all of you know, that's a huge part of your budget process, and B, more importantly, a huge part of the fabric of your community. And one of the things that we've really worked hard to try to bring attention to, that so many people just don't recognize or don't understand all the time, is that prior to the pandemic, and I say prior to the pandemic because we know anecdotally that it's only gotten worse, but we don't have the new data yet. We will have the new data soon. But prior to the pandemic, there were roughly 40,000 kids in Connecticut that were classified as disconnected youth. Meaning 40,000 kids in Connecticut had stopped going to school and had stopped engaging in society in a positive, productive way, whether that was through employment, through, other types of things. And when we say youth, these are predominantly high school type kids that go into their early 20s, early college age years. So not all of them are school age, but the disconnection started at that time. And and by the way, it's not just a phenomenon that affects the urban centers. It's happening everywhere, all over the state. So when do we talk about these kids? Well, we talk about them a lot in the last few years in the area of crime. Breaking into cars, snatching persons, doing things that are very unproductive, violent, other things. But we never talk about how they get there to begin with. How do we lose them? And one of the reasons why we lose them is because our education funding system is so out of whack in the state of Connecticut that frankly, in many areas, our students with the highest needs are the students who receive the least amount of funding. It makes absolutely no sense. So back in 2018, which was really the last time that the General Assembly had pretty much equal representation between the Democrats and the Republicans. The Senate was tied at 18-18, and the House was very close. There was a bipartisan budget done that had several different components in it to set the state on a different, hopefully brighter, more fiscally responsible course into the future. And one of those things that was included in that budget was a new education cost sharing formula. And that formula was supposed to be, or is intended to be funded in steps over several years, all the way up to the year 2028, when it would be intended to be fully funded. But I think that you have to recognize where we were as a state in 2018. We were battling massive budget deficits. All of the conversations at the state capitol were about budget cuts, municipal aid cuts, tightening of the belt, all of these different things. And so that was probably a pretty bold initiative to say we can get this thing funded, fully funded by 2028. But now we sit here in 2023 and we're in a far different position than what we were in 2018. We no longer have budget deficits. We have significant budget surpluses. We have tremendous need. We know that 40,000 number is growing because of the pandemic. We know we have a lot of young kids who didn't learn as well during the pandemic through remote learning that are behind, or already getting left behind. So we know the needs have only grown. but the resources have grown significantly as well. So our campaign was really designed to ask the legislature and ask the governor, why wait? Why lose another 5 years? Why lose more generations if we have the need now and we have the resources now? Let's do today what we're supposed to do in 2028 anyway. And so that's why we, really launched that campaign. Now, along the way, what you had was you had the governor introduced a budget that the governor essentially said, no, I'm not really interested in doing that. I'm going to stay on the schedule of 2028. And then you had the Democrats introduce a budget where they took it a step further. They didn't take it all the way to fully funding what the 2028 ECS legislation would do, but they put more in than the governor did. They took an additional step in that direction. And then we were really encouraged when the House Republicans put out their own budget. And the House Republicans, who obviously reflect a level of fiscal conservatism, actually increased that funding and increased funding even more in their budget proposal. So we feel like there's a positive movement within the State House, at least within the legislative branch, to do more than what was proposed in the governor's budget. But we're, in these final weeks and really pushing to bring that to the finish line. The other thing that was a very positive move in the budget that was introduced by the House Republicans was they also increased the money for the excess cost, which is predominantly special education. And I think most of you know, battling the budgets, how significant the special education costs have become in municipal budgets and continue to grow. And I think the House Republicans put something like $50 million more in their budget for excess costs. We're encouraged by that, but we're at the crunch time right now on those issues. We continue to work with people in the legislature who want to do this. And we continue to push back on the administration, who has been good. The governor has been good to work with us on other things, but has really been the resistance, to getting this done. So we're trying to get the governor to come a little bit toward the legislature and to get something done that really will impact generations. And it's interesting, and then I'll change subjects, but there's a lot of talk too at the Capitol about funding for social services. I'm not opposed to that in any way. And I have a lot of friends who work for the nonprofits and I understand their needs. But the reality is twofold. First is public education is a core role of government. Public education is government. And so that should be taken care of first before anything else. The second point that I want to make is if we were doing the right thing by our kids, if we were raising kids, if we were taking challenged kids and getting a hold of them and keeping them in the education system, giving them hope, giving them opportunity, our need for investment in social services would actually go down. We don't do the right thing on the front end. We lose these kids and then we try to fund social services to go see what we can do to help them in many cases when it's already too late. So I think that's a very, very critical issue this session. The other thing that I think is important for Shelton, as you're doing for the fact that you're doing a budgetary workshop, is we're looking at, for the first time in 40 years since it was created, the municipal employee retirement system, of which Shelton is a member of. Its costs have become almost completely unsustainable. And for the first time in 40 years, thanks to Comptroller Stanton, who brought a group of people together, including labor, and got kind of an agreement in principle done. There are going to be some reforms. They're not enough. But for the first time, there's going to be some reforms that will actually lower the cost and help take a step in the direction of greater fiscal sustainability for that retirement system, which should have a positive impact on your budgets. And hopefully, you've received some of those numbers already from the comptroller's office on what the direct impact on Shelton is anticipated to be. But if you haven't, I'd certainly be happy to forward those over to you, in the next day or so after I make it back to the office. So I'm gonna stop there because I want this to be iterative and answer any questions that you guys have and also hear any feedback that you have. I think that's so vitally important to us and the work that we try to do on your behalf.
Thank you, Joe. Anybody have any questions? Anyone has to go?
I do. You touched upon something I was planning to ask about the GOP is in the assembly presenting a budget. However, I know it was a counter, they also did a counter proposal to Ned Lamont's budget, but that was rejected, correct?
Well, none of it's been rejected yet. The way it is, you have Ned Lamont's budget, you have the Democrats through both sides, the appropriations have presented their budget. The GOP has presented its budget, and now all of those budgets are out there, all as kind of negotiating tools, to get to a final package. Every indication that we have been given, from all the caucuses is that there is a strong belief right now. Now that building can change in a heartbeat, but as of right now, there's a very strong belief in that building that they're going to get to a budget deal that will be a bipartisan budget deal. I'm not sure what all components of the GOP's budget will be, will bring upon that deal, but in order to have a bipartisan deal, there's gonna have to be enough of the components in it that they believe in that are gonna be included in the final package.
They did focus on education, as I recall.
They did. I was very, very pleased with the fact that, you know, pretty much every budget that was introduced after the governor's took another step forward in education and providing more funding into education. So it certainly, was not a partisan fight in any way. If anything, it has been a somewhat of a battle between the General Assembly itself in a very bipartisan way and the governor. Both parties of the General Assembly saying, we have the resources to do more, we need to do more, the need is there. And the governor being somewhat resistant to that. But I think that, you know, he is at the table with them. They're all, as I understand, negotiating in good faith. The reports coming out of the room between them have all been positive. So I don't know that the governor is going to move as far as we would hope, but I think he is certainly at least is moving on his position to provide more education funding.
Joe, as our voice in Hartford, as our lobbyist, we hope that we can make you aware of some of our school district problems, which you hit on some of them. But just to be a little more, hopefully we don't miss anything. I just want to let you know that the laws are made in Hartford. The regulations are made in Hartford, and we carry them out down here in the trenches. Now, special education in Shelton is running $1 million, trending $1 million for last year. And there doesn't seem to be any help in sight. When you start a school year, I think the number that the Board of Education, the superintendent gave me was roughly 95 kids showed up special education requirements. It blew our budget. The budget had already been set. There's no defense. There's no way we can deal with this. I mean, if they're going to make these idiotic rules, then fund them. They're pounding another unfunded mandate on our backs. The superintendent got his hands full. He just can't cope with it. I mean, and this has got to be every municipality in the state. Perhaps with a few exceptions, those that they classify needy and give them everything. But I would suggest that those municipalities that are well run, well managed, we don't get that kind of treatment. We have to pay for everything, and it's just our kids need our help. Our educators need our help. We just can't tolerate this anymore. They're making laws that that are just ridiculous. If they wanna make a law, fine, but fund it. They don't expect somebody else would. Most of Connecticut, you pointed out in one of your communications that most of the Connecticut's municipalities are funding and education is well over 50% of the property taxes. It's just not an acceptable way to fund education. They put rules in that, you know, once you can't lower, once you reach a level, you can't lower. There's a lot of things that prohibit and keep us from working together. We have a lot of time has to be spent concerned, and we for the last 3 to 6 months, we've been watching the trend and communicating the trend, the way the deficit goes. We've not only got a deficit in special ed, but we're self-insured on insurance in both the city and the Board of Education. And these are issues that we're running into. We think that the health issue will correct itself. We think that will correct itself, but we have to manage it and we have to work together to do that. We have to be aware. Now, we're not going to build, on the one hand, we're concerned that we don't want to build a budget that's up here somewhere, and then the number of students goes down and the needs drop here, but you can't lower it. They don't allow us to manage. So as a result, we have to be guarded. We have to be careful. And so last year we had the same problem, and we worked to manage it, but it had to be done after the fact. And you don't put the money into the budget. You use surplus money to manage it. And this is the trend that will work. I don't know what the other municipalities are doing, but this is where we've been going, and we probably, probably for the foreseeable future, be where we'll have to go.
Yeah, so there's nothing that you have expressed that I haven't heard from almost every city and town in Connecticut for years. First off, let me just say about the chief lobbyist voice in Hartford. I have an incredible advocacy team on the ground up there every day that report to me, work for me, work under my guidance. I'm not in that building every day. And the reason why I'm not in that building every day, and I've never been shy to talk about this, I don't have the temperament to deal with them every day. Because the level of frustration that happens with the same perennial issues year after year. When you talk about not being able to reduce it, that's the MBR, the minimum budget requirement. By the way, and your superintendent, your representatives over here probably have a lot greater understanding on these issues than what I do, because a lot more expertise in them. But there are federal MBRs as well. So it's not just the state MBR, there's a federal MBR as well. But one of the great frustrations that I've had is how we apply special education to the MBR, because what happens is, and it's bad, I don't want to share this example to diminish the challenges you're going through, but we have a member in a very, very small town, that had a family of incredibly high needs, special education kids move into the town. We're talking kids that their costs were over 6 figures a kid. And for that town and their little budget, that was significant. But the town did the appropriate thing. They budgeted as they had to meet the needs of those kids. And then the school year started, or maybe it was the end of the school year, I don't remember which, but the family moved out. When the family moved out, the town was stuck because of the MBR of continuing to budget for the high needs of kids that weren't even there anymore. And so, you know, that became a real challenge for that community. But I think one of the bigger issues is special ed, and it's really tough to talk about because it's hard to get people to understand it. But most other states all across the country have this, and we have it too, this concept of burden of proof. And burden of proof, almost anywhere else you go in the country, falls upon a parent to come forward and prove that their kid belongs in special education. In Connecticut, it's the opposite. The burden of proof is on the community to prove that the kid doesn't belong in special education. So any parent that comes forward and says, my kid's special ed, they basically at that point become special ed because we're in reverse with the burden of proof. Now, from an advocate's standpoint for special ed kids, that sounds really good. Because you say, well, okay, especially if a kid needs these services, they don't need to have to battle the community to get them. But in reality, that's not what happens at all. What happens is the kids who really need the special ed services, their resources are getting drained to support kids in special ed that probably don't belong there. And then to compound it worse with those kids that don't belong there, you are somewhat stigmatizing them or putting them in a category for life that they're now categorized in just because mom or dad decided that, oh, I don't think that my kid has a behavior issue, or I don't think that they have another one. I think they're special ed, therefore they're special ed. And that's a real challenge that's talked about year after year. And you know that my point has always been, if what we're doing is so good, why do we have so many problems with it? And if what the other, 40 plus states are doing is so bad, why are they having the issues that we have? To take something and completely turn it on its head and say we can do it better. I could sit here and give you countless examples in Connecticut, not just in education, in other areas, where we've decided to do things different from the rest of the country because we can do it better, and we've ended up doing it way worse because of it. You look at the news that hit just this week on our pensions and our pension performance on the markets and investing our pension funds. If we would have just hit the national average, we'd have had $5 billion more than what we had, and really probably not even have that much of a pension deficit anymore. But because we think we're so much smarter in how we can invest, we don't. But here's the other thing that's interesting about that you didn't read in any one of these articles. When Connecticut talks about its pension debt, and it says what it is, it's all off of a discount rate, which is an assumption rate of how much they're going to earn on the markets. Our assumption rate for our public pensions is 6.9%. Any fiduciary person who works in this field will tell you it probably should be about 4%. So essentially what we're doing as a state is we are assuming that we are going to outperform the rest of the country in how we invest our pension funds. We're that much smarter, that much better. So we're going to make an assumption that we're going to have a performance that's better than everybody else's. That's the assumption that sets up what the debt is. But then on the other side, on the reality, not only are we not hitting that assumption, we're actually underperforming the rest of the country, creating an even wider delta. So when you hear about our pension debt, just remember that's based off of an assumption that's not reality. If you actually took that assumption down and matched it with reality, our pension debt is significantly higher than anybody is reporting because of that.
So the education is the most important part of our budget, and that's the critical reason why I asked you to come down. So I don't want to miss this opportunity. And I'm grateful and precedent with the board's permission. I'd like to ask the superintendent if he can give you any of his comments so that you go out of here armed with all the information you can to take back on our behalf.
I love that. Thank you.
Would you?
Sure, not necessarily prepared with comments, but this is a topic that we always talk about all the time. So, your words on the burden of proof is definitely something that is and even our advocacy groups in CAPS, and I know you mentioned Brand, you know, we're talking about it all the time. Do you know if the legislation is moving anything in that direction to try to change that? Because that is a key component.
No, it's, you know, the House Chair of Education, Representative Curry, who's new in his position. I have great admiration for him. I think he's trying to work with everybody. He's putting more energy and effort into these issues than I have personally seen, you know, in the past. It's probably good for you guys, but not necessarily. But education chairs in the past typically just dealt with like the teachers union and the board of ed reps, and that was it, you know, type of thing. Now Representative Curry is, you know, bringing in more people, getting a broader perspective, trying to bring people to the table. But right now, at this point in time, there's nothing moving on that issue because just from the rank and file standpoint, there's just not the votes to support it.
Okay. Which then, of course, dictates and goes back to like the ECS money, which again, we're banking on the idea of getting this excess cost, but from our end, we're hearing that, you know, the promises that were made in terms of the increases that were set at the beginning of the budgetary year are not gonna come to fruition. So there's this hope and expectation that we're hearing is not, you know, don't count on that funding other than the funding that we've received. Do you have any other insight to that there is gonna be additional funding that we're gonna receive that we don't already know of that's coming, that we've baked into our budget? I mean, we
Well,
have,
you know, the governor's budget, I think you can consider the floor. All right, so it's not gonna be worse than the governor's budget because the governor's budget meets the state statutory requirements, okay? I think when you talk about the promises that were made, I think the promises had more to do with, members of the General Assembly, the General Assembly leadership saying it was a priority for them to increase that floor. You know, the priority for them to pass was House Bill 5003, which in part fully funded ECS now as opposed to waiting until 2028. Right now, that's the negotiation that's taking place because you have the General Assembly members who have, from the very beginning of session, said this is a priority for us. And you had the administration from the very beginning of session saying, I only want to pay what I'm required to pay and not accelerate it. It's gonna fall somewhere in there. It's not gonna be less than what was proposed in the governor's budget, certainly. It's not gonna be probably all the funding that we have been asking for the full acceleration, but it's gonna fall somewhere in the middle. And then it's also a matter of where exactly do those dollars go? Because you have one budget that increases, you know, ECS generally a certain amount, but that's all that it increases. Well, then you have another budget that has an increased ECS, but then also has an increase to the excess cost formula. I think you're gonna see somewhere in there both of those. I don't know what amount, but I think you will see an increase in excess cost to help cover costs of special education. And I think you will see some acceleration of ECS. It really is just a matter of how much they get the administration to budge, you know, and the budget negotiations.
So I guess in speaking at President Glaze, to your point right before the meeting, it's a collaborative work session. You know, the good news on our end is that when we designed our budget, we used the governor's proposal as our baseline.
Yeah.
So that's what we presented to all of you, you know, in terms of, we know that we're gonna get this.
Yeah.
So the bad news situation is we don't know if and what we will get on top of that, and that's what generates the missing gap.
Yeah. So as long as you use the governor's budget as a floor, you're not gonna be underfunded from that. Yeah. It should be more. I think that it will be more. That's just a matter of how much more. And we may know that tomorrow. We may know it Monday or Tuesday of next week. You know, they're in those behind the door conversations right now. All the reporting that's come out of them, all the comments that's come out of Speaker Ritter and others is that increases in education funding are still their priority, and those increases will be included in a budget deal. It's just a matter of how much.
And I guess the reality of the situation, to your point of like the backdoor discussions going on, which we're appreciative of to try to move the needle forward is, our school year begins July 1. So, we need to have an operational budget
Yeah.
that we know we can fully fund, not with a
So that's,
question mark expectation to say, well, we may get one.
yeah, that's the challenge. That is always been the challenge with the General Assembly's timelines versus the municipal timelines for doing municipal budgets. The municipal budgets have timelines they have to meet and they have to finish many times before the General Assembly has finished its municipal finance package. Here's what, to give you a little inside baseball with our organization and the mayors and others, because this conversation has taken place since I've been here. There have been discussions in the past of saying, we need to push for a change to the General Assembly to say that the municipal package needs to be done earlier in session. You need to have, which seems to make great sense, you know what I mean? We need a municipal package, March 1st or whatever the case may be. Here's the downside to that. The earlier the General Assembly does it, the further they are from having their actual revenue estimates. Which what that means is they're always going to act on the side of being completely cautious and completely conservative. So if we get the numbers from them too quick, we may be leaving tens of millions of dollars on the table that we would have received otherwise had we waited and gone through their process. So, that's the give and take. That's the challenge. Do we get a definite number from them now? Or do we work when we know the money that we have and we can find everything that's under the couch cushions and get a much larger number from them later? To this point, we have always kind of deferred to the fact that we probably need to get the revenue estimates and everything and get the best deals that we can for our municipalities. If there may come a day at some point where our membership across the state collectively says, no, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, it's getting too hard, we need to start pressuring them for a municipal package earlier in the session. But that is gonna restrict the funds somewhat if we ever do that.
So I'd like to, give you one other point of view here. What seems to me, and I stand here year after year, every time the ECS money is coming down, you look at it, and most of it goes to the inner cities. Most of it goes to what they consider the needy communities. Well, our children need it just as much as their children. And I think they ought to scrap that formula and develop a new one, give the same amount to every child. And
Well, and I would just want to echo your word there, because that's one of the concerns we have, because despite what you're saying in terms of the discussions that we have to increase the costs, the formula prohibits the distribution of those funds.
It
So
doesn't
the state may say we've increased it, and Shelton, because we're worried about Shelton, doesn't get anything of that, so then.
Well, I think on the accelerated formula, I think Shelton does get more.
Well, I understand, we would get a minimal plus.
Disproportionate, it's not proportionate.
Correct,
There's
if
no
they're
question.
saying a percentage, we're not gonna get that increase percentage wise that you would see that the state would promote. And the
Yeah.
state says, hey, we're gonna promote at this percentage, but Shelton's not gonna see that percentage increase.
So let me get to the alderman's point, because herein lies the rub. It is all about, it's not just about scrapping the ECS formula. It's about scrapping entirely the way that we fund municipal government that has created this problem. The fact that Connecticut is so almost exclusively reliant on property taxes to fund local governments, which by the way, is way out of line with the rest of the country, not even close, create the disparity. Because what happens is, if you take, our largest urban communities, Bridgeport, New Haven, Waterbury, Hartford, those places. They also happen to be the areas that have the most tax exempt properties as designed by the state. So for example, like New Haven, over half of New Haven's property is determined to be tax exempt by the state. So now you've taken these urban centers that have great needs for the kids. And you've taken these areas with these high needs and you've taken their tax base away from them completely. So what does Connecticut do? How does it make up for that, aside from the ECS formula? It's pilot. It says, okay, we're gonna take all of this property off of the tax rolls. You can't collect any taxes on this property in your city. But don't worry, we're gonna make up the difference through pilot payments. But then the state doesn't fund pilot. So it leaves them in the lurch even more. So you're correct. The sad thing is what the state does is exactly where this conversation is headed. It starts to pit the suburbs against the cities. It pits one community against another. I think that's intentional, on some level to do that. Where all that goes away if we just totally restructure the tax code and we funded municipal government much the same way that municipal government is funded everywhere else in the
All
nation.
we gotta do, Joe, is start taxing, take Yale off the tax exempt rules. They got billions of dollars put aside that they give away.
But they're protected in the Constitution, actually.
Yeah.
Yale's exempt status, Yale's actually protected in the state constitution. Yale and Trinity, I think, are the two major universities that are recognized in the state constitution. But I know I'm gonna have to run soon. I'd share with you, I had to pick up my daughter, but I want to share with you a story that doesn't affect Shelton, but it does, because the more we have an out-of-balance tax system, it creates these crazy ECS formulas and all that don't work. So I want to share a comment about Hartford. So a few years ago, the NCAA tournament hosted one level of the bracket in the city of Hartford. Now, cities all across the country put in bids and compete to get those tournaments because, I mean, it's an economic boom. You have people come in from all over the country, they stay in your cities, they stay in your hotels, they eat your food, they're at your restaurants, they shop your local businesses. Any city in America wants to host big events like that because, they're attractions, major attractions that pull people in. Because Connecticut only allows towns and cities to collect revenues from property taxes. When all those people came in for that tournament and they stayed at the hotels in Hartford, every single penny that was collected on the hotel motel tax went to the state. It didn't go to Hartford. When they went and ate at the restaurants and they paid all those sales taxes at the restaurants and they went outside to the outdoor beer garden and they drank beer and partied and all that before the games, all of those sales taxes that were collected went to the state. Not one penny of it went to Hartford. So what did Hartford get out of hosting that big NCAA tournament? They got a giant overtime bill for their police departments and for all of the security and everything else that they had to have. It actually was something that is a big financial benefit to any other city in America, was a massive financial drain on the city of Hartford because all they got was the bill. They didn't get any of the revenue that came with it. We're going to continue to have these challenges until the General Assembly and legislature. There's been a million studies that have talked about it. You had a state tax panel study. We've done a study. There's been blue ribbon commissions. There's been experts who have come in from all parts of the country, and they all tell us the same thing. You guys need to completely reform this tax code. It doesn't make sense. But we continue year after year after year to do it in a really failed way.
Joe, I know we're not gonna have enough time, and I appreciate your coming. But I anticipated that we wouldn't have enough time, so I put 5 pages of questions in writing, and I'm gonna give it to you to take with you.
Sure.
And
We'll get
because-
those answers back to all of you.
Because this is a conversation that I'm sure we're gonna have again next year. And next year and the year after, it's not gonna be resolved this year.
And let me just say this, Alderman, it doesn't have to wait till then. I'm happy to come back next month, 2 months from now, anytime that you want me to come in and sit and have a discussion and we can learn from each other. I love the opportunity to come here. I'm happy to do it anytime.
Well, we appreciate having you, and we appreciate all you do for us up in Hartford. And throughout the year, I still would like to get, I'm still old fashioned, I still would like to see that, capital report. I still would like to see that hard copy, but it was so pretty.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I still got one.
Listen, we can get you one of those.
But we certainly appreciate you coming and thank you from the heart. You know, we have issues to work out and there's a lot of associated things that go with these issues that would make it easier for us to work out, to address our most important issue in our budget. And that, you know, that would be an education. And we're not gonna run away from it. We have to deal with it. We have to make our decision by the end of this month. So we don't have too much time to go, but we'll get through it as we did last year and the year before.
Well, by the end of this month, hopefully we'll have you some better hard numbers as to what type of revenue that you're gonna be able to expect in this budget.
Well, if you do, let us know.
We will.
Absolutely.
You did mention that the governor's proposed budget could be used as a floor, correct?
Correct, yes.
So you know what number that was in the governor's budget for Shelton?
Not off the top of my head, but we can send that over to you. We do those breakdowns and reports, for every city and town, so it wouldn't take anything to run it. We have it on file. I could have it forwarded back.
Yeah, I think it's this
Maybe.
table's part of it right here, right?
Yeah.
So it looks like Shelton is getting 127,127 extra over last year.
Yeah, that could very well be the number, but, yeah, so it's definitely extra no matter what, because the formula accelerates, and the governor's budget had to meet the formula. He didn't put extra in, but the formula itself created extra, so.
Right, like you did subtract money from other towns, which was interesting, although it looks like the appropriations budget restored that.
Restored it, yeah, but the formula actually, the governor's budget stuck strictly to the formula, and the formula actually reduced some of the more affluent towns. But the General Assembly decided, and I think no matter what, this will happen in the final budget, to hold those towns harmless so nobody would lose money.
Can I ask you one question real quick?
Sure.
Would you say it's a fair statement that until the public actually gets involved and they hear an outcry from the public in Hartford, that they have to look at what they've already known for years and years has existed, and they've chosen to kick the can down the road, then it's not gonna change. You could have the 8 of us up here say what we want, and that's like water falling off of,
Yeah.
off the hood of the car. There's just nobody, we don't have enough. But if the public was to go out there and make a statement as to the, concern over the issues you brought up, that may have a lot more impact. But let's face it, a lot of those allocations also go to where they're gonna get the most votes. And, Leo, I mean, you were very polite about how you put it, but if you could buy those votes, you're gonna buy the votes, and that's where the money's gonna go. And that's the way it goes, and I think it's disgusting.
Well, we're a special interest driven state in a lot of ways. So it's, I agree with you. I think that when the electorate speaks up, and people talk at times about Connecticut voting with their feet. That may be true. There may be a lot of people here over the years that have voted with their feet, but if you look at the lack of change in that state house, I'm not so sure how many of them actually cast their vote with their, you know what I mean, for cast votes for change.
Well, also regarding
General Assembly will
education.
respond.
Regarding education, many states have their own education tax that goes to the education system, as opposed to, I was kind of hoping in more time you could have touched on the contrast between another state and ours. I know you're in a hurry,
The
but
largest contrast, and again, I apologize, I wouldn't be in a hurry, but I had to pick up my daughter, but the largest contrast is something that we also defend because it defines us as a state in many ways. But the largest contrast is most education systems are county-based. Because we are so, when I go to conferences with my peers from all across the country, and I start talking about public education, they look at me like I have 3 heads. Why do you care about education? You represent cities and towns. So our education system here in Connecticut is localized. It's not regionalized. It's not county-based. So we are very, very unique in that way. And, that creates its own set of opportunities, but it also certainly creates its own set of challenges, particularly because it's so localized and it's so property tax reliant. It's not supported nearly enough collectively across the state as a state priority. The state in many ways, I'm not talking about individual legislators, but just state policy state policy has really driven this idea that public education is the responsibility of the locality of the state. And that's just not the case. But that's how the policy has reflected it for years. That's why there's so much work this year to try to change that.
It's been a formula for failure. We at least proved that.
Yeah, great. Guys, thank you all.
Thank you.
So much. I really appreciate it. And, if I don't see you again before then, I hope you had a great summer, and we'll get, as information comes in over these next few days, I'll make sure that we get that back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
There any other business come before this? Well, I got a special meeting.
Are we gonna talk about any of the budget numbers or? Like,
No, what budget numbers?
like the, you know, you mentioned the MERS, we have the police pensions that we know the rates that we have to cover are going up. And so it is the line item. Yeah, it's on, thumbs up. So we know that the amount that needs to go into that account
Yeah,
needs to be higher by, Paul's estimate was close to 100,000, right?
well, then, yeah, he said, you haven't got the numbers.
No, for the comptroller had already done that. He said he's gonna send that over, but Paul Hiller already had those numbers, didn't he? We talked about it during the meetings with
I don't-
AT.
I don't know if he has the numbers. I haven't seen it.
You gave us percent, you gave
Yeah,
us percentages, like,
normally-
23.5%.
Normally, I would get it, I haven't seen it yet. But did you get them? Did you get those numbers?
Well, not for them. I'm talking about the police pensions.
He's on the police pensions right now.
The police pensions? Well, like he said, they're revising, lowering the cost.
There's a revision.
But so there's an increase, there's
I
an
don't
increase.
have them yet. I don't have them yet.
But Paul Hiller was talking about them and the increases that were in,
Or what?
Paul Hiller. Mr.
You heard
Hiller,
about it?
he gave us percentages during the workshops with A&T. I thought they were final.
Those, I don't believe they were. I think he was working off of the sheet, giving us numbers that he had, and he was working just a
Yeah, I
line.
didn't think they were final.
I didn't think they were final numbers. I thought they were working. That's why it's a workshop. I think it's workshop numbers. Because he has to give us a final accounting that I don't believe we received yet.
You made it sound like the state had, they already
Yeah.
finalized the
We have,
distributions.
well,
I don't believe we had a final number for it yet.
we'll find out.
Because I used the percentages that you gave me to calculate, it's about
What are you gonna do
$900,000.
with, what are you gonna do when you get those numbers?
Okay,
Plug them into the budget. That's the next step. Plug all these numbers into the budget, come up with a budget, and I'll bring it, a recommended budget here. And then you can look it over and you can vote on it.
so we're gonna do all that on the 25th?
I'm not gonna prepare a budget here, in a workshop. For everybody to share and see, it's not ready yet. Okay, it's just not ready.
I'm just trying to get a feel for what it might be. I thought that was what the workshop
So
was
if you
for.
want those numbers, we'll get you that information. Donna, make sure that the request is made of Paul, if he's got the numbers, to send them to, Kevin.
Okay.
All right? Anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn? Second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
thank you, Anthony. Anthony, what's your status? What's your ETA?
We're, about 5 minutes out. We're on Route 8. We'll be there very shortly.
We'll be here in about 5 minutes to
So we're gonna call a special meeting when they get here.
do a special meeting. You wanna delay a couple minutes?
That's fine, you guys need a break, you've been up there.
I think it's a good idea, just, if he's gonna be here in 5 minutes, we'll wait till they get here, and then they can be participating from the beginning. So we'll take the.
Is the helipad clear? dollars.
Well, that's what the pledge of allegiance, because we did that in the earlier meeting. A roll call. Let the record show. And item number one, authorization regarding 0 and 123 Canal Street grant and sale. Council. Francis, please.
Excuse me, Fran, would you talk to the microphone? Some of us are deaf up here. Yeah, turn it on.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. With regard to the property that, is the subject of this vote that you have to take. I can stand here and tell you that it was previously before you. I cannot tell you which meeting it was, because it was during COVID. And one of the anomalies of Shelton is almost every piece of property near Canal Street is on Canal Street. Those roads run perpendicular to each other, and they still call it Canal Street. When I first got here, I was very confused by it, and I have to say I'm still confused by it. So I brought along a map, but I need authorization from you in 3 ways. I need you to essentially reauthorize the sale of the property, which you had done previously. I need you to approve the participation of the city in cleanup, which is part of our contract responsibility. And I need you also to accept back the easement, which is part of the transaction. And it's part of the transaction because the property that's being sold, and I'll go into more detail, this is just a summary. Property that's being sold has the river walk over it, and that's the municipal project that continues throughout all the properties down there. So what we're doing is we're effectuating our responsibilities to clean up the property incident to and post sale. And we're taking back an easement on the property so that the construction of the river walk, as it's called, can continue. With regard to the property, it's called a number of addresses, if you will. 0, 123. Some people call it 113, 123. I think the easiest way for all of you to understand what it is to recall the buildings that used to be there. The Samarius building or company, a storage facility for the chromium process group, the Axton Cross building, and something called Scholastic. But the portion that is Scholastic was transferred to the city somehow. And then as part of this transaction, the city has agreed to sell a strip of that to this developer in order for the assemblage to take place. So the project in the end is an assemblage of 5 pieces or small parcels of property that are down there on what everybody calls the slab area, the undeveloped slab area, I guess, to the left of your park. And I recited the properties just a second ago to give you the specifics, but I also have just a marked up map to give to you. You probably received at the time of the notice of this meeting a map showing the configuration of the 5 parcels that I just recited. But what I'm handing out is something that shows the location of the 5 facilities or previous buildings, whatever you want to call them, that existed down there, to help you in your mind understand what we're discussing.
Was property already under contract?
It's been under contract since before COVID. And one of the reasons it's taken so long is COVID.
And so was there money already appropriated for the cleanup, work that needs to be done there?
There was money used for cleanup historically for each of the 5 properties. But the agreement is that the city is going to bring it to a more clean, if you will, level. And that work is going to be done post-closing. That work is probably going to be done with, hopefully done with funds that are available, the so-called brownfield funds. But regardless of that, the city is committed to doing it. That was part of the contract originally.
But do we have an estimate of how much that's gonna cost?
It could cost $100,000, it could cost 200, it could cost 300.
And it depends on what also the offset of the brownfield
Right,
access is, could cost nothing.
right.
Right, it could be grants from brownfields, but we don't know yet. Do we know when we get that kind of information?
There's a request in to get some type of funding. I don't know the timetable.
How much was the property sold for?
$700,000.
Sold $100,000. Okay, so as long as the cleanup doesn't cost the city any more than that,
Right.
then the sale makes sense, essentially.
Okay,
And the easement for the river walk looks like it's going all the way around the edge. Is it gonna connect to anything on the other side?
it's eventually supposed to connect to a river walk all the way down, and I have,
We'd have to go across the train tracks.
we don't have a easel, so I'll be a mobile easel here. You can see this is the property you're looking at,
Right.
and the gray is the
Weasel.
gray is the river.
No attorney comments, come on.
Well, some of my best friends are attorneys.
I've heard rumors to that effect.
I'll hand this up so you can look at it better. Okay?
I have Veterans Memorial Park.
Does anybody want to see it?
I know, I have a question, if I may, maybe you can't answer it, but I noted on the drawing that you've given us, and on the drawing that was sent to us, thank you, that the paved area goes off the easement for a while there.
Right.
Is that gonna be a problem, or?
If you look at the map here, they're gonna redirect.
Very good. That's what I would think they were gonna do, but.
Yeah.
I did see that, and I wanna make sure we were covered for
Yeah.
that, thank you.
So I'm looking at this is the train trestle right here. Would that be, oh, here, I'll show you. Is this the train trestle right here going
Right.
across the river? Or that, well, actually, that's the river walk.
Yeah, that's the river walk.
Okay, that's the river walk, so that's not the train trestle.
The trestle is further down, way down.
Yeah, so it's probably off just off the end of this, okay.
This is Pier 131.
Oh, it's Pier 131 would be off the
No,
map
Pier
too.
131 was not on the map.
I don't, Pier 131's on the other side of the train trestle, left of the train trestle. I don't think that's quite on the map. I think that's on.
If you want to orient yourself with the map that you have in front of you, there's a street coming from the western side. And, I'm not sure the name of that street, but it's
So
the,
you got Canal Street here and it goes up this way, so essentially the farmer's market should be right here, I think, where the legend is.
you're correct,
Right,
you're correct.
right, so then this is the property. So this is property right up against the train tracks, the train tracks would be essentially the left edge of this property, and the trestle would go across the river.
Correct.
This is the river up here, right this way. This is the
It
river.
says Houstonic River right on the map.
Right, yeah, so the river's going that way, so the train tracks will be right about here, here, 131, over here. So there are three things, you need reapproval, the sale, the money for the cleanup, and what was the third thing again?
Take back the easement.
Take, oh, the easement for the, okay, take back the easement.
Mistake on the policy attention.
I made a mistake on the map?
Sure.
You can tell me.
The stone patio is a Civil War monument.
Is it?
Okay, I didn't draw it.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, so what is if you go to the right, that patio, is that the covered,
Oh, yeah, that's the,
is that the pavilion?
the rotary
Yeah.
pavilion, it's rotary
Or
pavilion.
Shelton Pavilion, yeah. Shelton Pavilion, stone patio. This doesn't go as far as I thought it went, okay. That's the thought, John? Anybody want to see what I'll say? Have to fold it back a little bit.
Now I know you're.
Thank you. All right. So if you have any questions, I can answer any questions.
How much, do you know how much we've spent on cleanup so far?
We've cleaned it up over almost 25 years.
Oh, yeah, really hard to estimate.
Yeah.
We received a lot of money, we received quite a bit of money from, SCDC. Worked very hard to get us a lot of grants and, quite a bit of money to clean up a lot of these areas.
Yeah, mostly, I would say just reading the history of it, I'd say 85% of the money's spent down there, if not more, for either state or federal grants.
The mayor has a very good rapport with the Brown site people and does an excellent job working with them.
All right.
Do we need some sort of vote on this or?
They have a motion written.
You have a motion, John? Grant, okay.
I'm sorry, this one is complicated. I thought that it would be.
Brad is going to read a recommended motion whereupon one lucky member of this board will say, so moved. And another lucky member of the board will say, second. On your toes.
I'll read it slowly, and if there's any questions, please stop me. But I try to cover all three actions that I'm asking to get from you. Be it resolved, before I start, the buyer's name is Riverview Park Royal LLC. Okay? Be it resolved that the sale to Riverview Park Royal LLC for the sum of $700,000 of real property known as 0-123 Canal Street, which is composed of parcels 130-3, 130-4, 130-5, 130-6, and a portion of 130-7, and was previously the site of the Samarias facility, a storage building for chromium process, the Axton Cross Building, and a portion of the Scholastic Company parcel be approved. And be it further resolved that incident to the sale and thereafter, the city of Shelton complete its environmental remediation responsibilities and tasks as further detailed in the original contract of sale. And be it further resolved that the mayor be authorized to take any and all actions to complete the sale of said parcel, including taking back an easement for the river walk as described on various maps presented to the Alderman.
So removed.
Second.
Thank you very much.
I'm not sure who made the so move.
We know you got the second and
Yeah.
I thought it was a question. Does the contract have?
The winner is, who's the winner of the so move?
Eric,
We got a question.
Yeah, I thought
I have Bernie second.
Does the contract have anything there, like how far away any building would have to be from the easement for the river walk? So it doesn't crowd it?
The contract had in it a component to have the applicant apply to the Planning and Zoning Commission for approval of the project. And that project was approved with the Riverwalk located and situated around the building that's going to go up. So they've already approved the location of it. The location of it is close to the building in some areas, but they approved it. And then it wraps around the building. The building pretty much comprises almost that entire area that you see there. The parking is underneath. Most of the parking is underneath.
We can put the parking on, well, I guess it depends on the type of remediation. So I was just thinking if there was a cap there, underground parking wouldn't be impossible, but there's no cap, then it's probably fine.
You mean an environmental cap?
Right.
Well, you can use an environmental cap and parking under the building if the building is raised.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a raised building. All right.
All right. I think I'm good.
All right, that's one. We got one more.
Oh, we
We need a
gotta approve
vote.
it though, right? We gotta take a vote.
We need a vote.
What are you want to take a vote on that?
Yeah.
Okay, motion's made and seconded, discussion. There being no discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declared passed unanimously. The next item, item number two. Item number two. Item number two.
Item number two, I believe you received as backup the actual agreement between the city and the Durham School Services Group. Am I not correct?
Yeah, we received.
I got it this morning.
Okay. All right. So the first thing I want to say is this is a good agreement. This is a, if you will, a handshake to, let's see, resolve all differences. There's no hard feelings between either side. And the settlement is for $250,000. That is recited in the agreement that you saw. And there is approximately $100,000 to $125,000 still allocated in the city's coffers as part of this settlement. What I'm trying to say is new money for the settlement is somewhere between $125,000 and $100,000. Or $150,000 and $125,000. This was approved by the court. I encourage the settlement to occur. I'm sorry I'm not standing at the microphone, but I have a bad
We
habit.
can
of
hear
reading
you better here.
Okay,
We can hear you better here.
well, I was only staying there because I was ordered to.
No,
Please get him a wireless.
yeah, it's fine. We can hear you good here.
All right, so the settlement, I want to explain one of the components of it. If you remember, when this city took over the buses, we took over the responsibilities for the Board of Education. And that's why the Board of Education is mentioned in there. The city is resolving the matter for itself and also for the Board of Education. And it does mention in there that any and all people that were involved in this transaction are also released. So it's an across the board settlement, done. Okay.
This happened about 4 or 5 years ago.
I think it was 2019, if I'm not. I think it was just before COVID.
4 years ago, yeah, right.
So the time cost the money, that makes it far less than between $100 and $150. Because we sat on it so long.
And you sound like the other side.
No, I'm on our side, that's why I'm saying it's a better deal than it actually sounds like on paper.
So I need, unless you have quite, you're correct. Just trying to stay to the gentleman's tenor on this one.
Move your question.
Okay, there's no further questions, no further discussion. Move the question, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
You want
We need a
Do a motion.
to motion?
Yes, read the motion.
I want to call it a motion. I know it's just a motion.
Would you kindly remove the motion?
Okay, I'm gonna do it over here, Steve,
Yes.
so you can hear it. Be it resolved that the settlement between the city of Shelton, Board of Education, and Durham School Services be approved for the sum of $250,000. Be it resolved that the mayor be authorized to take any and all actions to effectuate the settlement.
Second.
I want to thank you all. I never asked that you have a special meeting. This is the first time I ever have, and I truly appreciate it because both of these matters need to be resolved next week, and now they can before the Memorial Day holiday.
Never a problem.
Don't we need part of this motion for the extra money you mentioned that was necessary?
Well, it's a total settlement of $250,000.
Right, you said there was 125-ish already, but so we don't need a motion to appropriate another portion for that?
Maybe.
You're approving a settlement.
Okay.
Paul will take it. It would come from the general fund, except that there are other line items that he could dip into. I mean, if he takes it out of the general fund, then those other two items just get turned back to the city at the end.
Okay, so Mr. Hiller will figure out.
Yeah.
How to pay for it then, okay, so we don't need that as this, okay, perfect.
All right?
All right, so all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstention?
Nope. Want a motion for adjournment?
Move.
Wait, I got a resolution for that too.
Good, motion passed unanimously.
I'm hot in the mic
Motion
today, huh?
adjourned will be in order.
So moved.
There's a second.
Second.
Discussion. No? No discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Looks like 25 after 7.
Yep.
Get the hell out of here.